It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, March 28th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that really hopes the Flyers can continue their strong play against Montreal.
Yeah, I mean, that's all about consistency.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here, as always, with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. You can find us over on YouTube. We're on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get the latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, they sent Brad Shaw out uh, to the media again after the game in New York. And I think it's interesting that this has become a trend here. Like whether or not John Tortorella was behind the bench, we know like when he was suspended, he couldn't. But now, like I think this is twice now he sent an assistant coach out. And he did allow assistant coaches last season after the trade deadline to lead the bench a couple of times and do the
Mhm.
post game. And I'm torn here, honestly. Like, is this just a continuation of that sort of thing after the trade deadline? You give the assistant coaches a little bit more opportunity. Or is there something more going on here?
I mean, I've covered this coach long enough to know there's something going on. Last year was a different situation. You wouldn't need to repeat that this year. You were kind of throwing him that bone last year. This year, now there's legit things to be asked down the stretch when it's important, and he's not making himself available. So then he waits till the next day because he knows the
Mhm.
next day there's going to be a lot fewer people watching because it's just going to be the beat writers at practice and it's less people to address, fewer people. And so he's doing that by design.
Yeah, and given that, there wasn't a practice for people to attend,
Correct.
yesterday, hopefully, I mean, this is what I'm thinking in his mind, hopefully things can die down and we can move on to the next game because it'll be morning skate for Flyers versus Montreal, which is, why we're here today. But, at the same time, Bradshaw gets out there, and I think he had some good things to say. I think he's correct when he said, they've been playing some of their best hockey of the year against these top teams. And he acknowledged they couldn't do it for a full 60 minutes, but for most of the game, which I thought was an important point.
That
But
is
for
a
most
very
of these,
important point. Yes.
yeah, but, I think it's true, and I think that, it was good to hear from him that he feels that way about the team at least.
Yeah. I mean, he's a smart guy. Look, I think we all acknowledge that the difference between, I don't know, the Rangers and the Flyers is the fact that they can play a full 60 minutes with your full lineup or not. Both teams were missing a lot of players. So that's part of it. The other part of it is you also have to look at your collective group and kind of know when is enough enough. And so Brad Shaw is just as culpable as John Tortorella for throwing Ryan Paling out there in overtime when he was hurting. Like, we're not even going to say, like, second day now on this. I'm not going to talk about whether it's the right or wrong decision. I'm just saying, no matter who it is on your team, that guy should never go out in overtime when it's 3-on-3 and you've got to really push yourself when you saw that guy limp into the bench. There's no way there's enough time. Now, if you want to put him out second, third, fourth shift in overtime, that's fine. But come on, there's an unawareness here or not enough awareness of what's actually happening with players.
Well, and that's where I think I kind of diverge with what Bradshaw was saying because,
Right.
when he says, "Oh, the reason why we put Paling out there is because he's had a really strong two-way game over the past little bit, and has been taking the face-offs and all of that."
That's John talking. That's
Yeah,
John talking. It is.
well, even if it's Bradshaw talking as well, I
Yeah.
think that all of that could be true, which, I agree with to some extent, but not entirely. I think that he's shown flashes and he's been able to have some success, partially because he got moved up in the lineup, that it's not him generating all of that. He's benefited
Right.
from it. But also the fact that we all knew that he was struggling physically, that
Right.
and that was not mentioned at all,
No.
and that bothered me as
Right.
part of it.
But his faceoff percentage has been down the last couple of games too, since being moved up in the
Yeah,
lineup. Like we know that too. We have stats and things to look at. And this is the problem when coaches say things that we could look at and say, but that's not really what's happening here. So I'm not going to take the diversion. Like I'm not
right,
going to
and
start talking about these other things and quoting these other things because I don't believe in them.
right, and when you have the Rangers put out, like, some of the top offensive guys in the league and then
Yeah.
Adam Fox as the
Yeah.
defenseman, right? Like, Ryan Poehling isn't gonna win that faceoff. Like,
No.
I'm sorry, he's just not. He can win the faceoffs against third line centers and fourth line centers,
Correct.
but he's not gonna win the faceoff against top line centers. And that's what you're saying statistically. You can see
Right.
his percentage is going down because of the tougher competition.
And Noah Cates
And
hasn't played well all year. So I don't even know where this is warranted, where you say, well, he's still one of our best defensive forwards. While that may be true, playing defensive in overtime has been proven to be a bad move. All you're
yeah.
doing is delaying the inevitable. And this time it wasn't even delayed. Like it was
Right.
quick.
So overall, then, like we know the Flyers have to play the Rangers another time before the end of the season, and those points are going to be important. Like, how do the Flyers break through and actually win next time?
So got to play a full 60. You can't have like a swoon in the third period like they did. Uh, got to protect the house. I mean, Sam Ersson was under siege. And again, I can't stress enough, for as young as he is in his career, it's not ideal here. Like if this is Carter Hart, we say, okay, it's Carter Hart. He's had enough seasoning. That's fine. This guy has not had enough seasoning. He hasn't. And I'm not going to say he played a bad game, but I'm also going to say he could have played better had he had a lot more support. And he didn't have that.
Yeah, and I think that it's just a matter of not getting overwhelmed by the
Hmm.
situation
Yeah,
defensively, and that it's like what Bradshaw says is absolutely true, that when they stick to their game plan and they're on it, they can be successful. But when they break from that, it's chaos. And that's when they
sure.
get the scrambles in front of the net
But
defensively.
that's true of most teams in most sports. Honestly, if you
Sure.
watch enough sports, you know that that is mostly true. Like that's an easy thing to say, and it's true most of the time for almost all teams. So
Right.
I,
But in the moment, it's harder. I get it. I
yeah,
get it. It's
yeah,
just that it's very clear that that's like what happened. And they just have to figure out how to recover from it faster when they
right.
get
Well,
out of sync.
actually, they just have to figure out how to recover for a team that's just blocking an incredible amount of shots. Like that's the thing. Work on the recovery of that, whatever that might be. So if it's extra time in the room, fine. If it's meaning that they can't practice, fine. But there's a lot of guys banged up here that now have to go through this, 9-game stretch just to see if they can make the playoffs and survive. And, there's some, I mean, you even saw Konechny was in tremendous pain at one point late
Yeah.
in the
Oh
second
yeah.
period. Tremendous pain. At some point, this all catches up with you. And it definitely, his scoring's not been the same. I mean, we all acknowledge that, right? Konechny's scoring has dropped. Well, why has it dropped? Because he's being asked to do so many things And there's only so much every player can do. That's why, yes, if you all tug the rope evenly, that's great, and it could work out better. So, yes, in theory, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, figure out how to get more sticks in there instead of using the body, maybe
Right.
a little
No, I
bit.
mean, and that actually should, that you're very right about that. That should actually be a focus because, again, it's just hard to survive this way.
All right. Well, the next opportunity the Flyers will have to test this out is against the Montreal Canadiens tonight, and they are so fascinating to me, just because of what they can do when they really put it all together. Despite where they are in the standings, we are going to talk about the Habs coming up next.
Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Uh, Go with University of Houston. I think you might like the odds there for the men's tournament. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets.
Of course, on tomorrow's show, we will talk about this very game we are about to preview against Montreal. We're going to look ahead to Flyers versus Blackhawks and Connor Bedard coming to town. So much to get to on the Friday show. Later, we're going to talk about Maxim Massé, draft eligible prospect. So stay tuned for that. Montreal Canadiens are again just a real interesting team because when they have a good game and they put it all together, they can absolutely compete with anybody, but they just don't do that very often. And they don't have the depth to get the matchups that they need to in order to be able to win more often, in my opinion. But I think that you look at what's been happening with them recently and that this is gonna be a tough game for the Flyers for many, reasons, but one of them is emotional with Martin St. Louis, right?
Yes. As an example, when Martin St. Louis' mom died, look at the emotion that poured into the Rangers that year and how far they went on that. I'm not saying it's going to be the same, but they did beat the Avalanche. So I think the emotion from Martin St. Louis being back did do that. And so, yeah, this is going to fuel this team. Like, hey, we got to, this guy's coming back. His son's hurt. We gotta make it. We got to give him some wins here. We got to finish strong here. Not that they weren't going to do that before, but this is something that gets a locker room going. And so, yeah, it's a worry because again, you worry if the Flyers are kind of like exhaling a little bit because they're out of that gauntlet. But like I said, I think the gauntlet is just surviving now. And this is one of those trap games where you look at this game and you say, there's trouble on the horizon here. Potential trouble. Doesn't mean it has to be.
Right, and, this is the 2nd of 3 games against Montreal this season. The Flyers won in a shootout on January 10th, way back when, and both of the 2 remaining games against Montreal are on the road, in Montreal, which is a really challenging place for any team to play. Let's be real. And these 4 points are going to be huge for the Flyers between these 2 games. And I think that establishing themselves in this game is only going to help them the next time they come back to the building.
Well, I'm noticing a trend. Like I'm looking at Travis Konecny, right? And um, it seems like when he's playing under 20 minutes, he's more effective. When he goes around 23, 24, then you're getting negative returns on him sometimes. And so I think that's something, if I can notice that, that's something that the coaching staff should notice. So there's a limit to even their best player, how much time you're piling on them. I'm sure if I look at Cam York, I'm sure the mental mistakes go up after, that 22-minute mark. These are things that are going to be important against a team like the Canadians because they've got some real talent. Slafkovsky's playing the best hockey of his pro career. So,
Absolutely. He
and
just got his 40th point.
he's a big man. And
Yep.
so he's hard to handle. We know that Suzuki is slick. We know that Cole Caulfield could be really good. Caulfield's having the best point year. He's at 55 points already. And he's only got 20 goals, but he got 12 power play assists and 8 power play goals. So now that tells me I got to keep them off the power play because they could hurt me on the power play. And Slavkovsky, I got to somehow neutralize him, or I could have a problem this game. And then the goaltending can be decent. Monteblow's not bad.
Right.
Honestly, Urson's better than him, but I can't say he's a lot better than him. So when you look at the matchup here, it's kind of like don't make mistakes and don't go out of your way to prove your point, whether it's Hathaway trying to, really get under their skin and then all of a sudden finds his way in the penalty box, or even Konechny. Like just play your game. Don't fire them up. Don't give them a reason to want to come out there and play their best game against you. I think that's the biggest thing.
Right, and you look at that talent that is stacked in that top line with Caulfield, Slavkovsky, and Suzuki, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you have to be at the top of your game defensively to play against this line. And, their second line is, pretty solid as well. I think, you get below that, that's where it's a little dicey, but, with Newhook on a line with Gallagher and Armia has, had some success against the Flyers in the past as well.
yeah. Armia could be a really good two-way player. He's a guy. He's got some size. He's got good skating ability. So you're right. He's one. Again, they gave up a shorthanded goal last game. He could do that for them.
Yeah, and so I think it's just really, stay disciplined, as far as your defensive play and try to prevent shots in the first place without using the body to block them.
Right. I like that.
I yeah. I think that's really a good way just to start off this game and maybe try and take a break from the overwhelming shot blocking a
Well,
little bit.
here's two ways to do it. If you beat them to the puck, you've done it. You don't have to do it. But the Flyers against the Rangers weren't able to do that. They weren't beating them to the spot. And really against Carolina, they weren't either. Maybe Montreal, they can. Beat them
Yeah.
to the spot, play better angles. If you play better angles, then your active stick can 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 work instead of having to try and dislodge the guy from the puck. And then after that, if you're playing your angles right and everybody's playing where they're supposed to, you shouldn't have to block that much. You should let the goalie see the puck. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, and I think they've run into troubles with some screens that,
Yeah,
focus your energy on clearing the screen.
right.
And and I think that, especially if Erson's back in net, I think, like, when he has a clear view, he's gonna be fine. Like,
Yeah,
I don't worry about him in those circumstances. I worry about him in the high traffic situations.
right. No, I mean it's just yeah, those are some key things, some little things. Also, I would say there was maybe 4 shifts in the Ranger game where the Flyers actually controlled the puck for a while, which they don't normally do. Do that again. It
Yep.
takes time off the clock. It tires out the other team because they stay out there longer, but they don't do that enough. Even when they're winning, they don't do that enough. And honestly, I don't care how many shots they put on somebody. I don't care if you have 60 shots. I don't care. I'm not going to talk about it. I'll be like Torts. I'm not going to talk about it. I only want to talk about what goes in or what almost went in, not like, hey, we had all these great A chances. Well, they're better when they go in.
Yeah, and, the Flyers versus the Habs, statistically, like, the Flyers have a ton more offensive zone time on
Right.
average than the Habs do. They should take advantage of that time
Yeah.
and wear out Montreal because they can do that. They can pass the puck around,
Hmm.
and I know it's frustrating when they don't get a shot off, but at the same time, tiring out the defense is a really
It's a
effective
strategy.
strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, they have
And
guys that can make the first pass and get it out, but don't always, be in such a rush. Maybe let those guys, I don't mind when that first pass goes into the zone, somebody goes in and gets it, and then all of a sudden a good cycle starts. I don't mind that at all. But I don't see it enough. But I see other teams doing it against them, and then all of a sudden they're out there too long. Like you got to do that to your opponent. And I think this time of the year is a good time. But again, look, I just think Montreal's going to be dangerous because they're playing with house money. Nobody has
Yep.
any expectations for them. They're at home, and that's the other thing. This is if this were in Philly, I think the dynamic would be completely different, but it's not.
Yeah, I think that's the part of it, and like I mentioned, both of these 2 remaining games against Montreal are in Montreal,
Yeah,
and so they're gonna have to kind of fight that atmosphere, home ice advantage that
yeah,
Montreal in particular has. So I just think it's a really important matchup here, and, getting a huge win would go a long way toward boosting confidence, and especially if they can do it balancing minutes, balancing their defensive approach, so that they can move on, a little bit refreshed.
yeah, yeah. No question. I mean, again, you got to get as many 2-point games as you can. Uh, you get a point, it's okay, but at some point, the 1 points just hurt you. Um,
Yep.
So they got to try and win some of these in regulation. Not saying they weren't trying the other day, but the other day, I mean, how many times did the Rangers come back on them and then they came back on them? Like it's just, when you trade chances like that, you don't want to do that too often.
No, you do not. Alright, so we will get to our draft eligible prospect, profile on Maxim Massé coming up next. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 over on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Maxim Massé, Russ, I was intrigued that you wanted to talk about this kid. He is young, but not the youngest. So he turns 18 next month. So in plenty of time
Yeah,
for the draft. He's a right winger, 6'1", 181, plays in the Q. Right now, he's got 75 points in 67 games. We know the Q is a high scoring league.
yep,
Uh, and we've talked a lot about the Q in terms of not being able to predict NHL success as well as we used to with kids coming from this league. And I think, you look what his rankings are: late first round, like all the way through the second round. So is it the Q that's accounting for this wide swath in rankings, or is there something else going on here with
no,
him?
no, it's the Q. But I bring him up because this is the kind of guy where, let's say, the Flyers have both of their picks and they're looking for some offense from their second one. They do need some wingers. They need centers too and more, but they do need wingers too, and on the right side. And so he plays that, and he's pretty fast. He could play at pace. He's not super fast. Thanks to Instat, though, I saw he gets 59% of his shots on goal. Like his one timer is a weapon on the power play, and that's one reason why I would go after him, because again, you can't have enough of those guys, especially with the power play and the Flyers. I can't look into the future, but you got to hope it's better than it is today, right? So, he could be one of those guys. He knows where the puck is going. So, like, if he's on the right side, puck's on the left side, he's still going to the net. He's waiting for a rebound. He's waiting for a pass. He's got the stick down. He's really good. He's very good, intuitive player. Uh, he changes the angles on his wrist shot. I like it a lot, like to the point where Caulfield does it. So I think He's got one of the better shots in the draft. He plays a lot of minutes. He draws penalties, and he doesn't take too many. So this is, you need players like this. Teams need players like this. It's hard to say that there's going to be a lot of Q players that are great from this draft, and I don't know if he'll be great, but I know he's going to be good, and I see where he's got second line potential, and that's good. He's got some height, and right now, um, I like everything I see, and I think he's already got the offense down for being a pro, and he's sturdy. He's not like waif thin or anything. So he's got a lot of things going for him.
So most of the critiques I've seen of him are about his skating and that people are nervous about, his ability to get any speed bursts or like keep up with an offensive rush. Like, what would you say to
I mean, what I would say to that is for most of Claude Giroux's career, he didn't have any big speed bursts either, but
that?
he knew where to go and he knew how to get in open ice and did pretty well. Just last night, Josh Doan played for the Coyotes. Uh, he's not known for his skating at all. Now he got a nice goal, but he's made it to the NHL, and he's not known for his skating. Now, they're saying it's better than it used to be, and that's fine. So I think there's a lot of guys that have not great skating or what we call ugly skating. Bobby Brink has ugly skating, but he still has these other abilities that you say, okay, you still can make it that way. And between his power play abilities and his hockey IQ and everything else, I don't think everybody has to be a burner. I just don't.
Right. And, another thing that seemed to be a trend in scouting reports on him, is that he's more of a playmaker than a scorer, and especially looking at the queue, like he's not going
I
to be able
don't
to
know
get that
about
many
that.
points. But yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you is like, and I feel because I feel like sometimes guys get put into boxes as playmakers or scorers, and like,
Yeah.
why not both? That's what I don't get in terms of some of that analysis.
I think he is both. And I think he's got such a good shot, like I said, on the power play with the one timer and the wrist shot that he could be a scorer. I think he could play that role. Now, he's not going to be able to score 50 goals. I'm not going to get crazy, but he probably could score 25 goals and be like a 55-point guy. Something in that range, 60 points. I think he can do that. I think he's on track to do that if he keeps up with everything else. So, yeah, I don't see him as just a playmaker. He's more than that.
And, it seemed to me that some time in the AHL would help him adjust his game
Yeah,
accordingly. I
absolutely.
think, like, when you go from the queue to, like, pro hockey, adult pro hockey, right? Like, I think that you need to adjust your style a little bit just because of the way the game's played, and the AHL is perfect for that.
It is.
And I think this could sort of train him in that way. And if you're like, we don't need him to be Owen Tippett, right? He doesn't have
No.
to be the guy screaming up the side of the ice
And
with the
Owen
puck.
Tippett wasn't Owen Tippett until like
No,
2 years ago.
right. But he could be the guy that's trailing Owen Tippett that gets the puck and
And
then
that's
has a
what he
good shot.
does. And
Yeah,
that's what he does. And that's why I say
right.
he could play at pace. He's just not going to be leading the pack. That's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I don't think that I would complain about a guy like that, late first round or early second. And I'm just wondering if there's this weird gap in between, like there's somebody else higher on the Flyers board at the Panthers pick, but then, in between that and when the Flyers pick in the second round, is he like likely to go? Right? Like, what do the Flyers do in that circumstance?
Yeah, they can't do anything. I mean, the only thing they could do is if they don't like what they see, um, I shouldn't say it like that. I would say it like this. If their pick, the second pick comes up and they
Mhm.
still have a couple of guys that they value highly in the second round, then that's when you can trade back and get an extra second rounder, and then you'd be able to get them. But that's only if you have them higher on the board than maybe even some people are picking for players in the first round. Only in that
Right.
circumstance would you do that.
Yeah, I am very curious to see where he would fit on a Flyers style draft board because
Right.
I think like he's a guy that the Flyers could absolutely love and see as, a really good project that they're willing to take a risk on, or they could pass him up entirely. I feel like there's no in between with the
Yeah, I don't think
Flyers
there's
with
an
a
in
guy like
between.
this.
Like he would be like a little bit slower than like a Simone Gagne in his day, but similar
Yeah,
offense and maybe
yeah,
more like Giroux kind of offense, but maybe not as high end, but
right.
close. I think he's like right in that sort of in that gap there. And yeah, honestly, the Flyers have had good luck with those kinds of players.
Yeah, they absolutely have. So, definitely a guy you want to see if he moves up or down the rankings as we get closer to the draft. You can keep track of all of our draft eligible prospect profiles on our lovely spreadsheet. There'll be a link in the show notes. And if you have a guy you want us to talk about, please feel free to send them our way. You can send them in via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment over on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow with a recap of the Habs game, a look ahead to the Blackhawks, and more. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows like Locked On NHL. Find it on the free Fire TV channels app. I am Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, as SPORTSOLOGY.
Have a great day, everyone.